Hi. Thank you all so much for coming. My name is Christopher Parks. I'm the Education Director at the McCarter Theater. And we're very excited to be here for McCarter Live at the library. I'm joined today by Michael Cadden, who is the Director of the Program in Theater and Dance at Princeton University. Also Rob Campbell, who is playing Hamlet in McCarter's production of Hamlet. And Daniel Fish, who returns to McCarter for the fourth time to direct for us, and he is directing Hamlet for us. Thank you very much for coming, gentlemen. So I wanted to start by asking you, Daniel, if you could talk a little bit about what brought you to Hamlet. I know that last year we did a workshop of Hamlet with a handful of actors in our rehearsal room. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that.
An interesting question, isn't it? What brings one to Hamlet? If you ask that, I think, well, my parents, of course. I mean, because it's one of those plays that speaks very personally and very deeply to anyone. And so I probably can, and I think a lot of my interest in the play has grown out of it as a play about a family, a play about a son, a father, a mother, another husband. And I was very interested when I first spoke to Emily Mann and Mara Isaac and Janice Perrin, who is Mara's producer, Janice dramaturg at McCarter, about my desire to do the play. I was interested in exploring those more domestic relationships, in stripping the play of some of its pageantry, if you will, and really focusing on kind of the most human parts of it. And as I think as probably a primal way as one could. And so we did a workshop, where I just got 8 actors together for 4 days. And I really just wanted to see what would happen if I worked on the play for 4 days with 8 actors. And I did, and that really became a genesis for production. I thought, well, we can actually do the play with 8 actors. We don't need 20 or 30. There's an interesting way of doubling the characters. And that was really the genesis for the production, and has remained something that I keep going back to very concretely, and I think really visually as well. That the elements of that workshop, which were a table and 8 chairs, that's a version of that is production that if you come to McCarter that you'll see.
Can you talk a little bit about you as an actor approaching the role, Hamlet, or something like that?
Yeah, I think that, I looked online at one point a few months ago, just curious about productions past and just the listings of the Hamlets and all of the different, just in New York, let's just say. But, naturally it's there, and it's something that's inescapable when you're working on a speech of Hamlet. And it comes back to you. You do, whether you like it or not, you do hear things from various Hamlets from past, whether it be on film or on stage or whatever. But ultimately, you can't help but when you really dive into it, you cannot help but simply experience it for yourself, and without any kind of experience of having past experience or past memories of it. It really is just something that starts happening to you, and it's such a 4 or 5 dimensional experience, the whole dive into it, that the productions past start fading away quite quickly. Yeah.
And then the production that you guys are doing, particularly, do you feel like, Daniel was talking a little bit about the doubling, certain roles are double cast, only a handful of actors again in this production or in the workshop. Do you feel like that too helps you a little bit. You don't have, you know, all the purple and the battlements that you're running around on, as many swords.
Yeah, I mean, there's the purity of the domestic story of simply being about dad, mom, uncle, girlfriend, girlfriend's dad, best friend. It's not about a castle. It's about those people. And then within the doubling, it's fascinating to experience the various ways of trying different ways of doing it, in that when you have someone who is playing Claudius play Guildenstern, when he is Guildenstern, the experience of having Claudius through that prism is a fascinating thing, and casts up a very different and very specific kind of light on that character. No matter, even if you're talking to Guildenstern as if this is Guildenstern, it's not the actor playing Claudius playing Guildenstern. It's you even if you're just trying to focus specifically on that the Guildenstern character, you're really experiencing something a whole nother level when you have this other when you're having this doubling happening. When you have Claudius as Guildenstern, it adds a whole nother layer to the experience. It supports. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, if I may, there's the novelist Iris Murdoch in her novel *The Black Prince*. There's a passage in it where one character is talking to another. An older man is talking to a younger woman about Hamlet. There's kind of a brilliant analysis of the play in this novel, and in it, this older character says that the subconscious mind delights in confusing characters with each other, and that there are sort of a limited number of characters, and that while I read it after I had started work on it, I think it sort of, in a way, explained an impulse that I had that I couldn't quite articulate, and one that I think is also a deeply Shakespearean one, in terms of the importance of the imagination, in terms of lines kind of echoing from one character through another. And we do know that in his company, actors did double. And so there's just a really interesting dynamic that starts to come into play.
The idea of when you are a theater artist and you are approaching a play, you're approaching it in a much different fashion than you would as, you know, a person who's reading Shakespeare, or even, you know, a theater goer. As a theater creator, you have so much more possibility. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, what's been so special for the students over the course of the semester is really being introduced through Daniel's journey through the play to sort of an artist's process, to a director's process. You know, where do you start when you think about doing a play like this? And how do you think about the text? How do you think about the possibilities for, you know, sort of what the theater will sort of look like? You know, sort of how do you decide even what you think the play is, you know, about? And so instead of starting from a kind of literary critical point of view, right, sort of, you know, which would be the normal situation in an English course, you're actually starting with an artist who's asking initially what could seem to be some appallingly basic questions. And then surprisingly, you realize that sort of, you know, those are questions actually that you need to ask yourself. You know, that you've taken all sorts of things for granted about what you thought about Hamlet, what you thought you knew about Hamlet, and sort of you're pushed back to the beginning. I would agree with sort of Daniel. I think one of the things that people have sort of learned during the course of the semester is that what initially seemed sort of, you know, unorthodox sort of was only sort of, you know, seemed unorthodox in relation to a kind of narrow orthodoxy of what constitutes normal Shakespearean production, right? And sort of, and you know, we were talking about this today in class. Sort of a normal sort of included a castle, and normal included a guy in tights, and sort of maybe someone dyeing his hair blonde, and sort of, either, sort of, a kind of period setting of some kind or another. And all these preconceptions that people had about how you do Hamlet, how you do a Shakespeare play in general, have, I think, one by one over the course of the course been kind of removed. And suddenly people are kind of looking at the play and looking at the process, I think, again, as if for the first time. So that's an incredible gift sort of that an artist can offer a student that perhaps a professor of English can't. Or it's the rare professor of English who can.
And the reason I challenged when you said it was unorthodox, with respect, is that this issue of as though for the first time, is to me a critical one in working on Shakespeare, and a very, very practical one. Practical for the actor because I think he or she should try to speak the line as though for the first time, as he would if he were a human being in that situation. And I mean, Rob can tell me if this is helpful. We'll tell you if this is how practical this is. I think it's practical. That the speech is actually discovered or invented. That it doesn't really exist until the actor says it, and that the words are minted. And the reason I say that's, I think, a kind of orthodox approach is that Shakespeare used words for the first time. People came to his plays, and they heard words they'd never heard before, and they'd heard stories they'd never heard before. And so to try to tap into that on a kind of moment-to-moment level with how a scene is played seems to me to be the most fundamentally traditional of approaches, really.
Yeah. Well, you talked about once in another discussion about the language, and about getting to that language, and for, you said the same thing, only is that if you think that the people who came to see Shakespeare's plays back in the early 17th century understood every word or every moment, then you're probably wrong. There's so many new words that were presented. And I was wondering if you or Rob, if you could talk a little bit about that.
Well, the first part of the question, I think there are parts of Elizabethan drama that because of the time that has passed, that there are structural things in the language that are challenging for the modern audience. I think that just on the most simplest way about it, I simply believe that if I truly understand it myself and am able to communicate the sense of it, that we will be able to understand it. There's things that are, just trying to think of an example of one. Horatio says, I say to Horatio, when he comes to greet me in the beginning of the play, I say, "What make you from Wittenberg? Why have you come from Wittenberg? Why are you here?" And he says, "A truant disposition." He's feeling like missing school. And instead of just saying, I know you're not a truant. I know you like school, I say, "I would not hear your enemies say so, nor shall you do mine ear that violence to make a truster of your own report against yourself. I know you are no truant." I mean, there is a number of thoughts that go through that chain that he's communicating. And, to ask an audience, do I think an audience is going to get every single one of them? It would be great, but I don't. I think that I think the way I go about it is I don't just say, let's cut this line. I say, let's understand it, let's invest in it. Daniel, one of his notes he always says is, the sense of the line, the key point in a line to be hitting as far as getting the sense across. And I don't know, it seems like we tend to keep things that are, we have more of a tendency to keep things that are challenging than.
Yeah, I mean, it came up today in rehearsal. The actress playing the second gravedigger, who is also the actress playing Ophelia, has a line, where she's talking to the other gravedigger, and they're arguing about whether whether Ophelia ought to be buried, and she says, "The crowner hath sat on her and finds it Christian burial." And the actor says, "Well, maybe we should change it to coroner because people aren't really going to understand what crowner means." And I thought about, well, we could change it, but it's kind of a can of worms when you start to do that. And also, crowner is a 2-syllable word and coroner is a 3-syllable word, so you're changing the meter of the line. So even if you make more sense, you might kind of throw the line into a kind of, you might jar it in a way that it doesn't really want to be. And I hear it and go, "The crowner hath sat on her and finds it Christian burial." I get the point that this person thinks that it should be a Christian burial. And to my ear, and maybe not to someone else's, crowner and coroner are similar enough that I go along with it. And some people might, but I think they'll get the main point. So that was just one example.
Can you talk a little bit more about the doubling? I think the doubling is so fascinating. What kind of things are you playing around with? I think it's so exciting.
I mean, actually start by saying that the students were, I think, a little skeptical at first when Daniel was talking about this doubling idea and the notion of doing Hamlet with just 8 actors, right? Even though, as Daniel said, it would have been the practice in Shakespeare's theater that actors would have played multiple parts, right? It's only more recently that we've adopted the kind of one actor, one role, right, sort of notion in theater. And so there was I think maybe a little skepticism until the first reading. Mm-hmm. And we were very fortunate to be able to sit there and sort of watch the actors sort of read through the play for the first time, and skepticism vanished, right? And suddenly the point of it, sort of came through the intimacy of the play, sort of the domesticity, as you're calling it, sort of the play, and particularly this notion that sort of, no matter where Hamlet looks, he sees Claudius, right? No matter where Gertrude looks, she sees sort of, other people in her life. No matter where Ophelia looks, right? Sort of, the person she's looking at is both the person the character she's looking at, and then the other characters that particular actor plays. And so there's an extraordinary claustrophobia sort of that comes, I think, sort of out of that. But then that sense also that we do have of sort of, in life sometimes. I had it as recently as sort of yesterday, that as much as we might think we're ourselves, for other people, we're not just ourselves. Right? A student who was a little angry about me, at me for something, sort of behaved in a particular way, and suddenly I realized I wasn't me anymore. Right? I was her father. I was every man who had ever said no. I was sort of a whole bunch of people simultaneously, right? In addition to sort of being myself. And I think the students were stunned, really, to see the degree to which this doubling and tripling was going to give them an entirely new sense of the way in which the play is actually structured, right? To constantly be repeating certain motifs, certain relationships, certain words. Even the one that Rob just used about sort of, what it was in my ear is not, I wouldn't, what would it say the line again?
I would not hear my enemy say so. No, shall mine ear do that violence? No, shall you do mine ear that violence?
Yeah, so they are sort of, if the person that's your friend is also sort of playing your enemy, right? Sort of, if we can hear in that scene sort of not only the stuff about, no, you're not a truant, but then also something about ears and violence being done to ears, right? Because of course that's how Hamlet's father died. Or sort of, sort of in the play within the play, there's going to be sort of a scene that suggests as much. So I think there's going to certain aspects of the play are going to come across all the more clearly, for this doubling and tripling.
If you're skeptical, trust that a bunch of really terrific Princeton students were skeptical too, and were turned.
Does anybody in the audience have any questions that they would like to ask? Sure.
I was asked how they indicated change of character, And for the most part, they do not change costume to indicate the change of character. That the change of character is either made clear by the way by the persona that they create, the way they speak to another person, how someone reacts or speaks to them, or also sometimes just the fact that the character's name is used. For example, Claudius, the actor who plays Claudius, plays Guildenstern, and the actress who plays Gertrude plays Rosencrantz. So Hamlet's mother and stepfather assume the role of these two spies who are Hamlet's good friends and intimates. And in the very first scene that Hamlet has with them, he's just had a scene with Claudius and Gertrude. He has a little scene with Polonius. Polonius leaves the stage. Hamlet looks over at the only two other people who are on the stage, who are Claudius and Gertrude. He sees them as his friends Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, and his first line is, "My excellent good friends, how dost thou, Guildenstern, how dost thou, Guildenstern, Rosencrantz, how do you both?" Shakespeare does it for you. He tells you who they are. He does the same thing with the gravediggers. That through the course of the scene, we actually find out that they're digging a grave. So for the most part, they do not change costumes as a result of that, but they change costumes more as, oh, you all right? As because there's an emotional or a psychological need at any given moment for someone to change. So it's.
And again, I think you could argue that Shakespeare wrote it that way. In other words, he knew that, in his theater, right, parts were doubled and tripled. And so he constantly was reiterating names. All sorts of things that a playwright wouldn't do today, because he'd assume that only one, or she would assume that only one actor was playing one role. Sort of Shakespeare didn't make that assumption because it wasn't true. It isn't the way they did things.
Yes.
You started out your program by announcing that you were going to try to present Hamlet as a domestic drama, emphasize that side of it. But of course, Shakespeare is so rich that in a play like Hamlet, there are all kinds of interpretations. One could do it in a philosophical point of view from, what kind of certainty is necessary for action, or things like that sort. Do you feel by choosing this domestic emphasis that you are consciously sacrificing other elements to the play?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, I think inevitably with a play as rich as this, one makes choices, and one has to make choices which by necessity preclude other choices. But what I see as domestic, another person might see as philosophical, or another person, or an exchange that I see as political. So, and I think the play is brilliant in that way, in that if you make a specific choice, it'll reverberate. And I've tried not to be reductive in those choices. So while I say I'm interested in exploring the domestic aspects, it's not a kitchen table and a television and a sofa on the stage, which you could do, and which I thought about doing, but felt that would kind of lock it down too much. So it's a little shiftier than that, I think. But certainly, yeah.
I think the intensity of within the nuclear family, within a nuclear domestic family, the kinds of philosophical issues that I think we all go through in those kinds of, for Thanksgiving, Christmas, funeral, those are the times those things come up for us. I think for many of us, I mean, some of us, it might be just a memory, but the intensity of questioning, what is a man? I think I have experienced that most intensely. It's been with my father, at my grandfather's funeral. That is sort of the essence of the simplest distillation of philosophy, I think, as far as experience.
Involved in the world of choices, and you can't make them all simultaneously.
When you talk about modernizing Hamlet, can you give me some idea, for example, how you intend to do that rather than have the ghost appear at the parapet in the castle? How are you going to convey that particular scene?
Well,
Remember, in Shakespeare's theater, no parapet, no castle, just to make that clear.
Okay. So
no parapet, no parapet, no castle, and modern dress. Modern dress for his times. I mean, it does, though, to me, that the appearance of the ghost has always been less about this crazy sort of smoke and chains or something like that than just seeing his dead father, seeing the man walk into the room. And I've tried to distill it down to that. And we're still finding what exactly that moment is. And we've done a few versions of it. But all of them, I think, have to do with trying to get at the base of that confrontation and that experience. I worked years ago as I was the assistant director on a production where the ghost came out and there was a big uplight on him and he was on a body mic like this and and I was like, what? So ghosts talk and their sounds can be heard everywhere? Where do we get that idea? And that there's always smoke behind them or something, or that they're strange. I mean, I guess for want of a better word, I'm interested in it feeling a little more real than that. And that's the source of it. So I'm not trying to dodge your question, but it's actually, and it's one I've kept coming back to, and have tried sort of some very large theatrical gestures to bring him on, and have of late gone, well, maybe it should really just be even something simpler than that, and taking cues from what the text does say when they describe the ghost after he appears, where there's a long description of him, and some of the things we are honoring, some of them we're not. There's a whole description about how he's wearing his armor and he wore his beaver up. That we're not doing, but they also say, was he pale or red? Nay, very pale, a countenance more in sorrow than in anger. And I think that's something we are paying attention to.
And I think Michael hit it pretty interesting. When they would do in Shakespeare's time a production of Julius Caesar, it didn't mean that the actors all pulled out the togas and the laurels for that production on. Rather, those actors would wear modern dress as well. So that idea of Shakespeare's company and the same approach you do of just approaching the characters and the characters' wants and asking the characters' focus, I think it's very well as well.
Shakespeare's company was lucky. It was the King's Men. So in 1603, they became King's Men. And it meant that they got all the court hand-me-downs, right? All the women's gowns, the men's stuff that people wanted to get rid of, went actually to the company, and that's what people put on. So if you were doing Cleopatra, you didn't look like Liz Taylor in some technicolor thing. You wore something that a queen would wear, something that a queen probably had worn. A really proper queen's costume, and that was Queen of the Nile.
Yes.
You said that this was going to be a more of a domestic play, less. Will the characters be showing sort of an emotional murder and weakening as the play follows through instead of instead of poisonings and stabbings, but will there be more of an emotional side to the murder? Like they will be defeated in an argument over a very important, sort of the symbolism of murder instead of a backstabbing. Well, that may happen, but will that aspect be good?
I would be very happy if that comes through. I mean, I think that's great. I mean, I think it's a wonderful question. I think it's a wonderful way of looking at the events in the play. And one of the things that I try to do when I talk to actors and when I talk to designers, I try to ask them just very basic questions. You know, what's a ghost? What's poison? Questions that we might sort of jump to assumptions about. Looking at A Midsummer Night's Dream, what's a fairy? And out of those questions, I think, emerge choices. What do I find poisonous? What does Rob find poisonous? It might be something in a vial. It might be something in someone's eyes. It could be a kiss. So I think that's a really great way of looking at this material and the world of this play.
To ask a second question, I've seen a lot of Shakespeare productions, both with American casts and with British casts. Mm-hmm. And what I find is that when I see an American production, often the actors speak in a way that I simply would not be able to understand if I didn't already know the lines.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think there are a great many American actors who speak Shakespeare beautifully and speak it as beautifully as a lot of English actors. I think it takes training and it takes an approach on a part of a company and a director to refine that. One thing that we don't have here is that in England, as in school, they read the plays, and what is it?
They're starting very young.
They start very young, so it's
at the age 10, you would be putting on productions of Midsummer Night's Dream.
So it's really it's a very sort of natural and deep part of them. But I've also seen productions of Shakespeare in England where maybe it's well spoken, but I actually don't understand a word because I feel like it's not investigated. I feel like they don't know why they're saying what they're saying, and I've seen that in America as well. So we work very hard on looking at why the character has to say what he says in this way and only in this way at this particular moment. And then I work with an approach which I learned from the English director Peter Hall about how to approach the verse, which has to do with honoring the meter. And I work really, really thoroughly with it. How successful I am at any given time, that remains to be seen. Does that kind of answer your question? Or?
For example, why are in a room like this,
Uh-huh.
a small room, is everybody mic'd? There's no need for a microphone in a room this size.
Well,
Actually,
I think we're actually mic'd because they're broadcasting it for local television. So I'd be happy to. And I'm not an actor, but I'd be happy to. And you're seeing the plays being performed in the Berlin Theater, which is an intimate space. The actors will not be mic'd, and I'm certain that you will hear them very well. I think there is training in America that is really great.
I have a friend who teaches with me in the program from time to time who is a sometime member of the RSC. And when he comes visit Princeton, he loves going up to New York and sort of around the East Coast to see productions of Shakespeare. And I asked him about it, and he said, it's as if the language were written yesterday. He said, when I listen to English actors do it, I can just hear 400 years of history, and consequently, I don't care, right, about the situation that's actually being presented on stage as a human situation, which is like human situations I know in my own life. But sort of Americans treat the language as if they were sort of making it up on the spot. And for him, there's a freshness to that. So I imagine that there's something of the grass is always greener on the other side to all of this.
Yes.
First of all, I want to thank Louis for having this program. I'm here with 10th grade class, and we're going to come sing Hamlet. And we talked about your point of view and how it impacts different audiences. And I'm really for American young people really getting into Shakespeare early. So my question is, from your point of view, what impact do you think this play can have on young people? With preteens, teenagers. Sort of talked about the domestic, but are there any other issues you think would really draw them and say a lot?
Well, there are a myriad. Love, deception, seemingness, the truth withheld, insanity, hunger. I think it's to speak to really anyone with an open mind and someone who's breathing.
To which I would add the treacherousness of those older than yourself. The parental generation is rather fatal to the young people in the world of Hamlet, and that's not a bad thing to hear now and again.
We do programs in the education department at McCarter where we'll go into schools and work with students. As a matter of fact, this year we did a production of Hamlet with the 5th graders at the Littwin School right here in town, and we happened to have Gertrude here in the second row, who was in that production. She was at
Yes, I recognize you. You were very good.
But when we go, I agree that I think that Shakespeare is really important to us and to the English language, and for kids to have an opportunity to have their first experience with Shakespeare be something really positive, as opposed to it being ground into them in high school by that English teacher who doesn't care anymore, which certainly happened to me when I was in high school. But the idea of kids getting excited about Shakespeare is so easy, we found, with the many plays we've done with the younger kids, because situations are so often about brothers and sisters and fathers and mothers, and I know that's what we concentrated on with our Hamlet that we did with the 5th graders, is that it's about these siblings and these parents and the struggles that they have with each other and the jealousy that they have, in their families. And that was certainly something that speaks to us in the education department, is that domesticity is prevalent not only in Hamlet, which is about kings and queens, but even if you look at, Henry IV, parts 1 and 2, that's about, these kids dealing with what their father's expectations are. All these other history plays. So it's there. It speaks to those younger kids. It's a lot of fun when they get a chance to grab onto it when they're real young. Yeah, in the back.
Oh, I just was curious. I don't know how practical it would be to given that Hamlet's so simple, but does the actor playing Hamlet do any Dublin? Does he get the chance to play any other roles?
Or did you try it at anything?
You want to answer that one?
I guess we did. We flirted with it for a day or two at one point. As speaking of Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, we did play around with Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, in a sense, being within my imagination, or I actually am talking to them as if they were there and speaking for them, as an idea to play with. They are. I was in the green room today because Daniel was considering having one actor playing the ghost, while another actor who had been playing Claudius was playing the ghost and playing with different ideas. And it was fascinating to see Michael, who had been playing the ghost for a while, sitting with Frank, who was preparing to try maybe playing the ghost, sitting together, sort of working on the text together. It's really beautiful, but it is sort of all up for grabs in a way when you're doing a play. When you're really just 8 of you, and anything can happen. It's really the soul of the play is really what it's about. So, and I see myself, in a sense, in each of these characters as much as I see Hamlet. If that makes sense. It's sort of an abstract way of saying it. But yeah.
Simply, he's not playing any other parts.
At the moment, I'm not playing other parts. Yeah. Lord.
Yeah.
You mentioned the whole idea for the first time, as if for the first time, and it sounds like the way you're investigating this, it's almost as if, in some sense, you're channeling Shakespeare, you're playwrights yourself, in a sense. And I was just wondering, when you have these sort of echoes of voices, I always wondered how a great writer has these characters, where these characters are in his head, and all those different voices inside, and where they come from, and I guess critics try to analyze to some extent how much is the voice, who is the writer in the especially they talk about the Tempest and Prospero as Shakespeare. As you're doing this investigation, do you sometimes discover connections that you wondered if Shakespeare was conscious of? Like you mentioned, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern as almost echoes of the mother and father.
All the time. I mean, I am constantly surprised and amazed by them. Just all the time. There are almost too many to list in the play, and whether he knew this consciously, who knows? I mean, it's hard to believe it on some level he didn't. It's just, but.
I mean, give one example, that came across this forcefully in that first reading. So clearly, at some level, he understood that for any actor to take on the role Hamlet was a lot like meeting a ghost. Right? So there it is, and you use the word channeling, right? Well, sort of those words that are out there and are 400 years old have to pass through this sort of body, right? And so the encounter with the ghost who says, here's a role I'd like you to play, right? Sort of, is not unlike the assignment that an actor is given. Oh, we're doing Hamlet. Here's this role I'd like you to play. And you see, in this play particularly, sort of the self-consciousness about the theatrical event, about what it is to be an actor, why acting is the central metaphor for human life, right? Why the theater is what best describes our sense of ourselves and our mortality and sort of our, fragility on the human stage, just comes through so forcefully. That he does. I mean, you do. If it's really cooking, the ghost is in the room.
Shakespeare played the ghost, right? Or that.
It's one of the great sort of theater myths. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Question for Mr. Cash. In Shakespeare's time, was there any opportunity for actors to ad-lib certain? So, is there any attempt to do this here?
So the question was, in Shakespeare's day, was there any opportunity to ad-lib, right? And the answer is definitely yes. Indeed, anytime actors on stage, there's the opportunity to ad-lib. Once they're up there, they can pretty much do what they like. And you'll recall that actually, in his advice to the players, Hamlet says to the players, and he, what is it? He that plays the clown. Well,
King.
No. Let them say no more than is set down for them, right? Because Shakespeare had plenty of experience with the guys who played those clown roles, which is that, again, once you're cooking, who cares what he wrote? milk the laugh, right? Sort of milk the laugh. So presumably it was practice, in his day to do just that, right? And I've certainly seen some great comic actors sort of go to town in ways that sort of departed somewhat from the text, but in ways that seem to be entirely faithful to Shakespeare. Now, I should point out that though Hamlet says, don't say anything more than set down for you, he's in the process of handing over 16 of his own lines, or 14 of his own lines, and say, and incidentally, could you slip this into tonight's play? Right, So he's not exactly being true to his own precepts, that it's the author's text that should be performed.
But as Daniel said, when we're doing it, we're quite religiously keeping to, we are not ad-libbing. I mean, if we ad-lib, it's, only if we run into some serious trouble, and then hopefully you won't notice it.
You'll notice it, and you'll see it.
Great. Any other questions? Yeah.
To focus on the domestic travails of the characters, etc., you had to find some material extraneous. What did you find extraneous and what did you cut?
All right, I can't think of, in that regard,
You haven't cut anything?
Oh no, we've cut.
Cut.
I've cut quite a bit. Michael could probably answer this question better than I could, because I've cut a great deal of the information about the ambassadors to Norway and all of that. Fortinbras is still in the play, but in a very in a streamlined way and in a way that's not as dependent on all of that information. So that if you know the play, a great deal of Claudius's speech in the second scene of the play that refers to the ambassadors has been excised. That's one thing I can think of.
But I don't think there's been, as it were, thematic cutting, right? Sort of, there's certainly been some streamlining, which is characteristic of sort of productions of Hamlet. We have a couple of different texts of Hamlet, There's not one thing that we would sort of be able to say, okay, that's the definitive version. And sort of people do compilations of the 3 different versions, and a little here, a little there, a little sort of this. Oh, take this out, take that out, sort of whatever. So there's a lot of textual choices you can make in relation to the play. But the one thing, as Daniel said, that they haven't done, which is as much done as not done these days, is to simply excise the Fortinbras plot entirely. Right.
Yeah.
Sort of, that's the easy. Yet, he just said. That's the easiest way to get the play down from a little over 4 hours to 3.
Can you talk, Daniel, about, this is your 4th time coming to McCarter, and you direct all over the country, and I was wondering, when you come to, I think that the Princeton audience is such a supportive audience, and doing shows at the McCarter might be different than perhaps doing them elsewhere. Is that in your consciousness when you're directing the play, who your audience is and this Princeton audience?
I think the way it's in my consciousness is that I know the best way for me to speak, for my work to speak to an audience, is for me to be as personal and as honest as I can be. I can't ever predict what another individual will think of a choice. That's the uncontrollable, amazing thing about what we do, and the great necessity of people coming to see it, and the charge of that. So I don't try to think, well, they're not going to like this, or they're going to think this, so I'm going to make this choice. Certainly, I think probably, the play doesn't want to be 4 hours long, and so I think about where a suitable break would be, and I think it'll be closer to sort of 2:45, 3. So those things I think about, but I don't think about them a lot. It's a pretty easy question. You think you've been sitting for a long time. We need to get a break in here. But beyond that, I do it by trying to be as true to my own impulses as I can, because that's the one thing that I hope I'm in control of.
And one thing Daniel has also said to the students repeatedly, and it's a great lesson, he said sort of, don't underestimate the imagination of the audience. Right, sort of, that, are they going to get that the same person is playing multiple parts? Will they know? Right, sort of, and the idea is that the audience is a lot smarter than they're generally given credit for. Sort of, if too little is expected, then people will live up to diminished expectations, live down to diminished expectations.
I think this is true. I think it's really true. I believe that audiences are really hungry. I think they're imaginative. I think they're interested, and I think it's our responsibility to speak to that in them. And when we don't speak to that, and we don't speak over and over to that, then those tools get numb. But they're there because they're human. And it's a big soapbox of mine.
And an effective one.
That's great. Actually, we have one last question. That's great, sir.
This is a question for the director, but I would appreciate also if the professor and Hamlet himself respond.
Hamlet himself.
Since you are the director, have you decided whether Hamlet should be sympathetic to the audience? I ask that because he's rather mean to Ophelia, to his mother. He has no interest when he kills Polonius. He has no sympathy whatever for his former two friends. How in the world is he to be viewed by myself, the audience, when he appears in the play?
As a human being, with frailty and faults and irrationality and anger and remorse and all of those things that make him human, I think.
It's actually, in each of those examples that you listed, while on one side of it was very true, on the other hand, Shakespeare really does cover the other side of it, the other side of that person, that human remorse part.
I've seen that other side, but I'm waiting.
Well, for example, with Polonius, he says, "I must be cruel only to be kind." He says,
he says, I think one of the examples you gave was to Ophelia. And for those of you who don't know the play, well, forgive me, but Hamlet is cruel to her after she tells him a terrible, terrible lie. The person he trusts more than anyone in the world. He looks at her and he says, "Where's your father?" And she lies to him. And she betrays him. So it's a very human response to that. Extreme, yes.
Yes, but she commits suicide by drowning herself.
And so, what's...
As a result of Hamlet's treatment of her.
Wait a minute. A lot of things happen to Ophelia during the course of the play, that if he's responsible for some of them, her father is almost always the person that's putting her in the position of having to do things that then draw his completely just anger from another sort of angle. And so if I were going to lay that dead body at anyone's doorstep, I'd be far more inclined to lay it at his, the father, Polonius. But again, this is going to be different from production to production. Those two Hamlets that we saw last summer, one Hamlet everyone wanted to wrap up and take home. He was played by a 23-year-old fresh out of drama school and was a kind of, he was a student, such a student, such a kid. And the other was played by an actor, I would say, probably 40 or so, sort of, an age sort of, kind of a somewhat arrogant sort of, temperament. Sort of personally, I think, sort of comes across as a little, kind of aristocratic and maybe sort of disdainful. And but that was partly, I think you were partly just getting who those guys were. Sort of, they were bringing themselves, as you inevitably do to Hamlet, and then people were responding, sort of to them, to that thing that is both them and is sort of, the character, sort of channeling through the specificities of who they are. The guy who came across as a somewhat princely, disdainful Hamlet was totally surprised to find that anyone found him anything but lovable. Sort of, he thought he should be wrapped up and taken home. And frankly, I would have. But, sort of on the other hand, the studenty guys sort of, thought he was really doing something that was quite edgy and sort of, would put, sort of, people off and, draw a certain amount of. So I think that, sort of, again, as Daniel was saying, this is where you let it, the audience gets to decide. Sort of, did you love or hate Bill Clinton's act? Right? Sort of, well, we know that we don't all think the same way about that guy. We don't all think the same way about Bush. Sort of, all of us are, sort of intelligent people having very different responses to the same set of stimuli. And that's what audiences are about. You can't control what it is that they'll think. They'll think according to life experience, according to everything that they bring to bear on reading the play, just as everything that Rob is, he'll bring to bear on playing Hamlet.
Does anybody else have any other questions? Well, I want to thank you all so much, our panel, for being. Thank you all for being here. Hamlet opens at McCarter Theater on May 3rd, and it runs through June. So thank you very much.